Alrighty, welcome everyone officially to today's WorkSmart Live, the remote office cybersecurity panel, which is part of our weekly webinar series called the Remote Office Series. I'm Dawn Church, I'm WorkSmart's events manager. Thank you so much for joining us today, and a big thank you to our friends at the Durham Chamber of Commerce for coordinating with us to make this event open and available to all of their chamber members. So today, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity, especially as it pertains to remote office environments, but also about how we should be thinking about cybersecurity for the future. So we talk about cybersecurity a lot here at WorkSmart because it's a field that's so incredibly important to business continuity, and it's always changing and adapting. And right now, we are potentially about to experience another big shift, with stay-at-home orders lifting across the country. So with any big change in the business community, hackers are super eager to take advantage of the disruption. So some of you might be planning on continuing to work remotely, and that's great. Or some of you might be planning to go back into the office, or maybe somewhere in the middle. But how should you be thinking strategically about your cybersecurity plan for the long term, which is what we're going to talk about today. So, and I couldn't possibly go over all of this information myself because that would be crazy. And I don't know all the things, which is why we have experts here today. So I'm going to introduce you to them. So first off, we have Marty Sanders, who is the CTO of the MSP branch of Arctic Wolf Networks. Hi, Marty. We're really excited to have Marty here today. He's bringing almost 30 years of experience with him. And he's going to be talking primarily about threat detection and response. So next up, we have Chad Bickers. Chad is the president of Herring Bickers Insurance Agency. Hi, Chad.
Hey, Dawn, how are you?
Good.
Sorry, my video is not working, so I apologize.
That's okay. We will just, if you're listening on Facebook, you can actually scroll through our pictures. We posted a fun picture of him today, I believe. So just, have that image up in front of you whenever Chad talks. So Chad's going to be talking today about cybersecurity insurance. So next up, we have TJ, who's our partner at Sophos. You've heard his name. You've seen his face many times. You want to say hello, TJ?
Hey, Dawn. How's everybody doing? Happy to be here.
Yeah. I mean, I'm good. I can't speak for everybody else.
Okay.
But
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. So TJ has been with Sophos 20 years in August, I believe, if I remember right.
Close. Next May. So
Next
it's 19.
May. Okay.
Right.
Okay, gotcha. But quite a while, and he is an excellent resource for us for pretty much all things cybersecurity, so we're really excited to have him here today. And last but certainly not least is a very familiar face here at WorkSmart. We have Brian Craig, who is WorkSmart's technical account manager.
Hey, Dawn.
Hey. So Brian is no newbie to the cybersecurity world either. He was the CEO of his own business. He runs pretty much everything cybersecurity related within WorkSmart, and he also knows all the things. So we have some really good people on the call for you today. And I have one last person to introduce you to, and that is our moderator, Marissa Wayman.
Hey, everyone.
Marissa is WorkSmart's marketing manager and also a very long time WorkSmart veteran. She's been with us for over 10 years and has held a lot of different seats within the company, and she's very well versed in all of these different topics and technologies. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to pass this off to Marissa and our panelists.
Why, thank you, Dawn. So, that's a perfect introduction. Cybersecurity was a priority before, and it's going to continue to be a priority. So we're just basically going to jump right into it. I'm going to ask some questions to our panelists. We're going to direct these questions right at someone, but y'all feel free to jump in where you think you can offer some more value. So we're going to go ahead and get started by talking about some of the things that are happening currently. I think that's a fair place to start. We've seen some changes with the way attacks are coming in. So Marty, I want to get this started by you kind of giving us a little bit of your perspective on what's happening in terms of, what's the number one way that people are being attacked? What's that way in?
Great question, Marissa. Obviously, as we have gone through these last couple months, the things from a cybersecurity have really shifted. When you think about it, we've done a great job of building tools and doing all these things. We've obviously had a shortcoming in the number of people doing cybersecurity work, and it just continues to get worse as we go through it. But when you look at it, the tools, they're capturing a lot of this information, but all of a sudden what happened is we had this huge shift in the March timeframe when we sent everybody home. And all of a sudden we are taking our work computers home. We're doing a lot of different things. We're sharing computers with other people. We're doing all those things. And the biggest challenge that I see is now you're sitting in a location where you don't have that face-to-face interaction with the people that you can just walk down the hall and go see something. So the number one vector that we're seeing right now is, it's one of those things that everyone is very familiar with phishing. I mean, having that capability, because we are a generation that wants to please. When the CEO or the CFO sends us a note and says, hey, I need to have this transfer, money transferred, or this card cut to me, please get it done ASAP. Our human nature, the first thing that we want to do is satisfy that need. It's, they put that sense of urgency in. So we're seeing this as it's continuing to be a bigger play as we all moved home. And the challenge is making sure that you have those tools in place, but then again, that shortage of people not able to go through and see these types of tools that are capturing it and then still getting through. So when you look at that, it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue, and it'll continue to go through this as we temporarily move back in or whatever we're going to do as well.
Yeah, and that's, it's funny you say that we talk about people a lot, because we really do. We remind folks, it's easy to remind people that people are that number one hole in your security if you let them be. And so with talking about people being a problem, we happen to also talk about the solution, which a lot of the times is just creating knowledgeable team members. And so, Brian, I wanted to ask your thoughts on this. What are the keys to having an effective security awareness training program?
Yeah, that's a great question, Marissa. What we've seen work best is a combination of training and the fish testing. Up front, we like to see users kind of take the training from an educational standpoint. It tells them, here are the items that you want to look for in an email. Here's what makes them look suspicious. And then on an ongoing basis, we see it done monthly a lot of times as a best practice, is to do that fish testing, which is sending an email to your users that looks legitimate, but maybe it has one or two or more of those items that would indicate that it's a phishing email, and then having the ability to report back on that and see trends and see, is the education working, is the testing working, and then also having a dynamic system where if you have one user or several users that are having an issue with this, that you can dynamically assign training to them to help them be better prepared to fight off those attacks.
And that makes sense. The goal of the training is, and this is kind of a reminder, is that it's not a checkbox that we're looking at. It's not I'm going to send you this training and hope that you take it just because we need to get that done yearly. It's more of a, let's change behavior in a way. Yeah. And so we have to reach people on that level. So that makes sense. Anyone else on the panel want to comment in on that? I know people in the security awareness training is a big topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I would actually simply just echo more what Brian is saying is that when you start doing that testing, it's really not a means for you to determine who your weak link is. That is part of it, but it's really to help that user identify what their own personal weak link is so that they can be better able to participate in the security of the entire environment, which includes not just them, but the organization itself. And so you want to make sure that you're consistently doing it more than simply just one-off here and there, that you revisit it from time to time, because that's how the user learns, is by the reinforcement. It's just like we do with our children. When we teach them something, we go over it multiple times. And as adults, we pick it up a little bit faster, unless you're an old guy like me, in which case it takes us forever to learn new tricks. But the reality is that it takes repetition. And so doing it more than once, more than, once or twice a year, will make it that much more effective.
I know myself, we do have a phishing simulation and a security awareness training program at WorkSmart. And I tell people I got one time, and I never want to get got again. So, so there is that kind of that personal incentive. I can feel that naturally. Whereas, when you come to a link that says, oops, you clicked on something you shouldn't have, I know in a safe way, oops, I better get my act together. So I can definitely feel that. Marty, back to kind of the threats we were talking about, and people being kind of the number one vector. What types of threats are we seeing today? What is your SOC picking up?
Well, it goes back to a couple different things. Actually, Don mentioned it early on, and talking about it's that journey. As you're traveling through all of your security environments, just like TJ and Brian both said, we need to keep up to date on everything. One of the things that's so important is, as we're going through this, and as you're going through and training your people and making sure, one of the things that we're doing now is, since we're at home, we might be logging into Amazon or logging into something else and using that same password. And one of the things that we're seeing is that user or that hacker coming in and looking at the password and capturing that password, and now all of a sudden it's going to be used for Amazon, but now it's going to be starting to be used for your business as well. So doing that account takeover and starting to go through and doing your privilege escalations and things like that, we're starting to see more and more of it. One of the things that you look at is just, obviously all the tools are in place. Again, we're looking at the people that are going through and making sure that, if you look at some of the breaches that have occurred over the last 5 years, the people knew that they actually were getting hacked. But what ended up happening is either they didn't have, the information scrolled by so fast, because we have so many messages coming in. We have all these different things coming across the screen that we become oblivious to all these messages going across. The second thing that you look at is, do I have enough time in the day to actually put the changes that were suggested to me by the companies that are out there finding these vulnerabilities and taking advantage of those? So one of the things that we're seeing is, making sure that we're watching what we call geo-velocity. Is somebody logging in from Seattle at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and then logging in from Cayman Islands at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? We know that those types of things can't physically be happening. So we work with the customers to make sure that, did somebody log in? Was this purposely supposed to happen? And usually it's not going to be something that is going to be happening. We spend a lot of time working with the clients to make sure that they understand what the rule sets are. If it's going to be a brute force attempt on the passwords, or if it's going to be low and slow, when we're going to actually have them come in and just try passwords. And even with multi-factor authentication, they still try to attempt and get in every once in a while. So it's one of those things that we continuously are watching that.
And it's a great point. We'll circle back to it a little bit later about the specific to account takeovers, because we do focus a lot on passwords, secure password policies, and protecting your environment from what could happen from a compromised attack. So, you know, before we get on to talking a little bit about how do you detect if something gets through and how to respond, I think this is a good opportunity for us to segue into kind of the strategic component. So we've kind of got a little bit of a taste of what's going on out there now, in addition to what we normally see, like ransomware, malware, all the fun things. But in terms of strategy, you know, it's important to have a well-defined cybersecurity plan, and having a plan of its own, instead of it being a component of, let's say, your, you know, your overall IT strategy. You know, dedicated planning is important. And so if we know that, Brian, I'd like to kind of hear your thoughts on what is that first step to building said cybersecurity plan.
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing I would recommend is taking an inventory of what you have, what systems you have, where they live, kind of identifying that surface that needs to be protected. You know, what are the potential points of entry to the network? You know, potentially vulnerability scanning is a good piece of that helps you identify where your risks are, where your systems are. Do they live in your office? Do they live out in the cloud? And from there, you get a little better idea of what that plan needs to look like and how you would build it.
Okay, so like the theory of know what you have so that you can prepare for the future.
So you can protect it.
Makes sense. Know
Yep.
your holes so you can plug them.
Yes.
So speaking, so an awkward way to transition, but speaking of holes in your environment, Marty, your Arctic Wolf Networks does a lot on the side of detecting threats and mitigating those threats. So I know a large component of the service you offer is kind of this idea of continuous vulnerability scanning. Can you give us a little bit of a kind of what is a vulnerability scan? Why is this so important? Why doing it regularly is so important?
Yes, and it's great. It actually just fits into exactly what Brian was just going through. And one of the things that you look at is obviously from the Center of Information Security, making sure that you have that plan in place, understanding what the hardware is that you have, understanding the software, understand what your password policies, all these different things. But what we're seeing right now is when we go into an environment, if we get the opportunity to win a client, what we see is about 70% of those clients have some vulnerability that we identify within the first 90 days. And that could be as simple as a server that's out of patch, or maybe something, you know, along that line. But the other things that you look at are just some glaring holes out on the outside. So first thing that we do is do an external vulnerability scan just to make sure that the customer understands what ports are open. We go through, have a discussion. Some of them may be open for a reason. Some of these servers may be sitting on the outside of the firewall for a particular reason. So as we go through, we do an external vulnerability scan at least once a month. It's something that we think, again, it's that journey. We never want it to stop because, you know, constant, everything in IT, we know changes on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So we want to make sure that we're finding if there's a new device that was plugged in or anything changed from month 1 to month 2. But same thing in that internal environment is doing that continuous vulnerability scan across every device that we can see. And one of the things that we look at is just making sure that, you know, obviously we know about Patch Tuesday, we know about all these things coming out. If you wait a month, you'd have no idea how many different things would change during that period of time. So we're constantly going through, and we want to make it so the customer, it sees it as a digestible item. Having that ability to go through and see the reds, the greens, the yellows, all those different things to make sure that they understand what the risk may be, and we can work with them. And one of the things that as we go through this, again, we supply the capability, but we also supply the back end, the people on the back end that can sit down and have that level of discussion to remind them about something that might be a glaring hole in their environment, so that they, you know, we have the capability to go in and put a little personalized note saying, I accept this responsibility or this vulnerability because of this. And we review that on a monthly or quarterly basis with them.
So it's fair to say that you take an initial scan to identify any potential holes across the entire infrastructure, the network, the cloud, wherever your data may reside. And then from there, it's, mitigate your biggest risks and then continue to scan so that you're continuing to look for holes, and then you can shift and mitigate risk as they change.
Absolutely.
It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, when you step back and you kind of talk about it from that perspective. So you're identifying through whether it's sitting down and inventorying your assets, and it's running things like these scans, you're taking steps to make sure you're aware of what's running. So what software do you have in your environment? So you know when to look at doing things like applications. So this kind of the next part of this strategy, it's fair to say, is around this idea of protection. And we, just as we talk about people being your number one security risk, I almost said flaw, but I don't like the word flaw, your risk, you need a multi-layer defense system against risks, people and otherwise. And so we've said it a couple times, and I'll call it out again because I think it's extremely important that where your data resides is where you need protection. So that's whether it's internal to your network or it's in the cloud, or if it's on personal devices. But being in the cloud doesn't mean it's safe. So just kind of reminding folks as we talk through protection and detection and all those things. TJ, I want to shoot this over to you about kind of protecting infrastructure. Actually, before we talk infrastructure, let's talk real quick tips about how to stay safe for end users. I think it's a nice little breakup.
Little segue there into a different track of thought. Not a problem. So in order to keep your users as safe as possible, you need to do primarily three things. One is you're going to make sure that they're understanding what the potential risk is. This goes back to what Brian was saying, is getting an inventory of what you have. Well, for your end users, it's getting an inventory of what they have access to and the type of the data that they're playing with. So being aware as an end user that this particular document or this particular file that I have has sensitive information in it, I need to treat it appropriately, as well as be able to recognize potential risk for things that are being introduced to me from the outside. And this kind of goes back to the training that Brian was talking about, where you want to test those users by making them become more actively engaged in their thought process throughout the day. So be aware of what they're working on. The second thing is to have a security platform in place to be able to do your scanning of objects that people are actually accessing. So are you looking for threats, whether they're malware related or they're even time related? So do you want to do enforcement on content that people have access to? Are they allowed to go to their favorite entertainment site? Are they able to go to their banking site during work hours? But also from a security standpoint, are they able to go to these sites that could represent a potential risk for me? And then lastly is going to be the security of the network, which is what Marty was talking about, which is being aware of the security of the platform that you're using. So is your endpoint up to date? So if you're running Windows, do you have the latest hot fixes and service packs installed? If you're running antivirus, which you absolutely should, do you have your latest updates for that installed? Now, from a end user perspective, a lot of this is typically going to be controlled by a central authority like WorkSmart, defining the policies that need to be in place. But users need to be engaged in it as well so that they can identify that there's a potential problem here so that they can reach out to the right group of people to get it fixed. So when they notice that there's something in the system tray that doesn't look quite normal, they can reach out to the staff and say, you know what, the icon on there that normally shows green is now showing red. Something's wrong. Is that a problem that I caused, or is it a problem in the system? And then for them to, again, be active in what they're doing, having a healthy level of suspicion of whatever they're engaging with, whether it's a website that they visit and not falling down the rabbit hole of things, or reading an email and asking some additional levels of question based off of the content that they're seeing. Did this really come from my CFO, CTO, CEO, or is it somebody else pretending to be one of those higher level representatives that is trying to scare me into do something that I wouldn't normally do?
Yes, I always tell people, well, I don't talk as much to people about their security policies anymore, but it was a conversation that I had a lot, which was just to really make sure that you're not scaring your folks into being untrustworthy, or to not untrustworthy, but trusting. But you want them to have that healthy level of trust but verify. So, if the CEO of the company, if Clay's going to email me and say he wants me to give him $10,000, I know he's not going to be upset if I call him and say, "How are you feeling today? What's going on? What do you need this for?" So I think that's a good, just kind of check your gut type of a thing.
Yeah, healthy level of skepticism.
There you
Paranoia
go.
is not exactly a bad thing when it comes to security.
This is true. A fine line between caution and paranoia.
Yeah.
So, we talk about the end users, we talk about staying vigilant, we talk about training. So training is obviously a big component of staying protected. But where would you, TJ, where would you recommend that if I'm a small business and I haven't really put a lot of thought into my strategy plan for cybersecurity, where would you say that I should just start?
The number one place I would start would be system maintenance. Making sure the applications that are in use are up to date and appropriate for the purpose that you're using them. What I mean by that is a lot of times people will figure out that, oh, I need to use this particular function, I need to complete this particular task, and I'll do a quick search on Google, see if there's some way to automate it, and then use that as kind of a single-use tool, but not really understand that it could represent a greater problem. We at Sophos call it shadow IT, where the individual user starts doing IT-related type of functions without having a greater understanding of the greater risk that it could present. So the first place is to make sure that the systems that are in use are appropriate and that they are maintained. That's probably the going to be the biggest quote unquote bang for your buck. Then after that, you'll then move into actually dedicated security solutions. We're actually looking specifically for threats. So whatever a user encounters, whether it's from a thumb drive that they happen to find, or back before when we were able to go out and visit people, actually get thumb drives at trade shows for free. Go ahead and plug it in. You want to make sure that the product in use is actually inspecting that and verifying it. And a little bit later, we'll actually talk about some controls that you can wrap around that and why those might be good things. But making sure that your system's up to date, making sure that you have a security solution up to date, both at the endpoint and the network if possible, are going to be your two primary starting points. And then after that, you can start getting to the kind of more task-specific functions.
So then if they're not in the office though,
yep.
your users aren't protected by your firewall, your typical measures
Yep.
that you would have in an on-premise network if you're used to working in the office. So how do you keep folks safe when they're if we're going to continue this in some capacity, how can we keep them safe?
Great question. And this goes to the particular products in use, is many security solutions, Sophos specifically, allows for the management of those platforms, whether they're inside or outside the network, so that the security team has the ability to define the appropriate permissions and the appropriate inspection and protection that the user is going to get, regardless of their location, and be able to make sure that it stays up to date even when they're on the road, that you're able to get the notifications as the IT staff as things happen, so you're not simply just, again, trusting the end user to tell you, because they get busy, they got other things that they're thinking of, or they're simply just too embarrassed to mention the fact that they just saw something that was dangerous and didn't know how to respond, and so it sits and it festers and it eventually turns into something incredibly bad. Having something that is capable of being managed remotely is key. And as we move out of this stay-at-home phase and start going back into the offices, a lot of organizations are going to start saying, you know what, we were able to do this with everybody working from home. Do we really need to continue to pay for the overhead for an office environment? Can we simply just get rid of that added cost of paying for a brick and mortar location and simply just let people continue to work from home? What's the cost benefit of that? And if that turns into a better cost benefit to let people to continue to stay at home, then again, having a product that you're capable of managing regardless of where the user's at becomes absolutely critical.
And with the theme of them staying home, we've talked about devices that you can plug into the system, but what about just the devices themselves? When they're working out of the office, they're at a greater risk for lost or stolen devices, and especially as people are getting more they're transitioning back into the workforce, they're going back places. At some point, Starbucks will be a thing again. So how do we protect the data on those machines to make sure that if they do get left,
there's actually two ways that I recommend into dealing with data security. First is encryption. It is probably the simplest way to ensure that data cannot be stolen and accessed by unauthorized users. And the largest bulk of it will typically be a mobile device of some sort, whether that's an iPhone, an Android, or a full-blown laptop. Thankfully, most people tend to, from an IT security perspective, thankfully, most people don't tend to lose laptops. They more often than not get stolen when they do end up outside of the control of the person it was issued to. But phones get lost, right? They get lost in the seat cushions of the couch, seat cushions of the car, and unfortunately they get lost in taxis and airports and whatnot. Same thing with a laptop, can every once in a while happen there. But if somebody were to gain access to that device, it's without encryption, trivial to be able to recover that data. So having encryption is probably the first thing that I recommend because it is simple, it works, and it has very little impact as far as the user's workflow. The second thing I would recommend is, again, going back to identifying the things that are important inside of an organization, especially from a data perspective, is to be able to implement data loss protection. And this is where, with Sophos, what we will do through policies that WorkSmart will define is inspect the content as files are being moved off of the device. So if a user puts it on a thumb drive, if they try to upload it through a web browser, we will inspect the content of that to make sure that it complies with the corporate policy for how that data should be handled. All kinds of organizations have secure content, whether it is healthcare information, if it's tax information, financial information for bank account numbers and bank routing numbers for payroll. Every organization has some of that data, and making sure that that information is constrained to legitimate methodologies of moving off of the device is also incredibly important. Now, that takes a little bit more work to be able to implement, but it provides a greater level of security as a backstop on top of the encryption piece. So from a control perspective, being able to limit where data is able to go and the ability to secure it from an encryption standpoint. Now, you can, instead of going with the more complex, I want to look at the specific data points, you can also simply just control the device and say, you know what, you're not allowed to use removable media on these devices because that's even easier to lose. As I mentioned earlier, most people have probably looked back through their entire career and can very easily count on their one hand how many times they lost a laptop and still be able to give somebody a firm handshake. Thankfully, I've never lost one in my career, knocking on wood there, but I have lost my phone once, that I'll admit to anyways. But I can, without a doubt, categorically tell you that I do not know where every single thumb drive I've ever owned is or what data is on there. And so there could be a data breach that I'm not even aware of. And by utilizing something like Sophos, you have the ability to say, you sure can use a thumb drive, but you're only able to bring data in, not take it out. So if you want to bring something in from home and plug it in on your computer, or maybe you want to shuffle something from a home computer to a work computer while you are working from home, like maybe a couple of media files or some other work-related content, you can bring it in, but not take it out. We can allow you to do that.
And I can't help but hear the kind of the theme over and over again is this: if you're sharing sensitive data, if you have personal information, if you have critical data, intellectual property, knowing where your data lives is so important. So kind of kicking it back to the beginning of the conversation where we talk about that first level, or that first step of your strategy is to identify what you have, and so once you identify what you have and you know where your data is and you want to protect it, the other component of that is the people and the process. So we've got the technologies, but I know that it's important for every small business, and I'm sure all small businesses, everyone on this webinar can agree that they know that it's important to have clear policies and guidelines for how to use the technology, for the computers, you know, from responsibilities to protection of data. So Brian, I'm going to kick this one over to you. Where do small businesses even start when it comes to creating these guidelines and IT policies?
Yeah, definitely good question. What we see pretty much every business have, there are three main policies that we see most commonly. You've got kind of your basic acceptable use policy, and this, you know, this is talking about access, use of company resources and files, whether or not there's any expectation of privacy on company-owned systems, that type of thing. So that's the first big one, is defining how you can use these company resources and hardware to your employees, so everybody's on the same page. The second one that we see very commonly and feel strongly about is having a you know, kind of a standard disaster recovery business continuity plan in place. And this is where you define, how do you back your data up? How do you restore it if you need to? What happens if a tornado hits your building and your servers are gone? You know, where does everybody access data from? How quickly can things be restored? That type of thing. And kind of continuing in that vein, I know we talked a little earlier about cybersecurity response and continuity plans. That's also a very important piece, because just like, you know, you could have a loss of your building, you could also have a loss of all your data and infrastructure from an attack, from a security standpoint, whether that's ransomware, whether that's somebody malicious inside the network. So those three main areas are where we like to see companies have a plan in place to deal with it, to make sure that they can continue to operate their business if something like that happens.
Setting clear policies and guidelines and making sure you know how to respond. I mean, that's it's straightforward, but of course there are resources all over the internet. There's actually a great resource put out by the, I'm going to forget the institution's name, but I can give it to Dawn so we can follow up with everyone about guidelines for policies, security policies for small businesses. But then, of course, if you do have higher security needs, you can always engage with a company like WorkSmart or somebody in a compliance field that can help write policies if you have trouble getting started. Another part of, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We've talked a lot about technology, the tools, the processes, but there's a component of this that I think is really important to touch on, which is cyber insurance, because it is considered to be another form of protection, of protecting your business in the event of a cyber attack. And so, Chad, what does cyber liability insurance cover? What does it not cover?
Sure, thanks, Marissa. And like Dawn said earlier, if anybody has a question, if they want to ask it while I'm speaking, I'm more than okay with that. I'm going to kind of piggyback on TJ's answer when you asked earlier what the number one thing that a small business should do. I think he mentioned maintenance and security. After they do that, they need to go buy some insurance. So the reason for that is, as everybody on this panel knows, it's definitely becoming more prevalent. The insurance industry has been a little slow to kind of catch up to the risks and the exposures out there, but they're really doing a good job now. There's some good coverages out there. I do need to kind of put a disclaimer on the answers that I give, because every policy is written differently. Every carrier has different definitions and stuff like that. So if I say that something's covered, I don't want that to be a blanket answer for every policy that's ever been written or everybody's policy or whatnot. So you need to kind of dive into the details with your agent or whatnot. But with a cyber liability policy, data breach policy, they don't even call them the same thing. There's like 3 or 4 terms out there for it, but there's typically 2 different distinct coverages. It's first party and third party. First party would be the insured, so that's the person buying the policy. Coverages for the insured, and then third party coverage on that same policy would be for coverage for your vendors, for your customers, that kind of stuff. First party coverages that would be very typical on a policy would be the cost to investigate a data breach, the cost to respond to a data breach. Many times there's damage to the insurance website. You can have business interruption, loss of income. That's typically going to be covered under a policy. Cyber extortion, that's becoming obviously a big deal. That would be covered as well. Loss or damage to an insured's data. Keep in mind that's data, not typically the hardware, but the data. So the hardware is going to come on a different type of policy, typically not the cyber policy. And then, of course, some of the emerging problems are the fraudulent transfer, as well as the social engineering. The better, newer policies, the companies that are really keeping up with what's going on out there, they're going to cover those as well, too. For third-party coverage, so that would be the insured or your company buys the policy, and then a vendor or a customer has come to you with a claim that something that you have done, maybe a virus that came from your server, came from one of your employees or whatnot, has caused damage to their property, to their financials, anything like that. That would be unintended disclosure of information, which obviously that's I have unintendedly released their information. Intentional disclosure of information, which would mean an email that went out that should not have had, confidential information. Maybe a virus that, the insured let out. Denial of service attack from the insured's servers. And then, of course, the violation of statutes concerning privacy and security. Those would be the things in a very generalistic kind of answer what a cyber policy would cover. Some of the things that it would not cover, and these would be the exclusions. Again, each policy has their own, but intentional or malicious acts. That would be if the insured obviously intended to do that, if it was, if it was known through a memo that they were doing, it's kind of hard to prove that, but there's also these policies have on them, Marissa, what's called a retro date. And the retro date it's a retroactive date. So if you come to me and you do not have any type of cyber coverage now, the retro date would start today when the policy started, and any prior act is excluded. So something that had happened 2 weeks ago, if I think I've had a data breach, I can't come and get insurance today for something that I feel happened 2 weeks ago. It has to be from the date the policy is taken out forward. So any kind of prior acts to the retro date on the policy is going to be excluded. Now, if you go from one carrier to the next, you can keep that retro date and it carries with you, so you don't start back over. Does that make sense? You can kind of keep your coverage going. Breach of warranties, all of the carriers are going to have any kind of gambling, game of chance type of, lawsuits. Those are pretty much going to get shot down pretty quick. Misleading ads, patent infringement is a typical exclusion. You can buy that back for people that feel like, that could be a potential exposure that they have. And then many times insureds own multiple businesses. So if the insured owns another business and he or she owns more than 15% of that business, they pretty much won't let you sue yourself. So if you have a majority ownership or some type of ownership in another business, the other business can't sue the insured. Try to kind of conflict of interest type of stuff.
Understandable. So then, you know, if we talk about it being a good form of protection, who, I think I know the answer to this, but who needs cyber insurance?
So basically, who needs insurance, cyber insurance? Basically, if you have a laptop, cell phone, or any type of mobile device or any device that transmits information, you're going to need some form of data breach cyber security coverage. One of the things too is these policies, actually, it's not just a electronic coverage. If you're a pharmacy and you have actual hard copies and information, that would be the same thing. If somebody broke into your business and stole files, this is what would cover that. So if you had the old way where our agency years ago used to have file cabinets full of socials and, you know, information, life insurance applications, if somebody came in and stole those, that would actually fall under a data breach cyber policy as well. So just a little bit of stats I thought were interesting. What is information worth out on the black market? A social security number. This is a Verizon 2019, so it's pretty new data. A social security number is around $1. A credit card can go anywhere from $5 to $110, depending on how much information. If you've got the security code in the back and the expiration, it's probably going to be a lot higher than just the number. Passports can go anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 in the black market. Medical records could be anywhere from $1 to $1,000 each, depending on how thorough they are. That's pretty much the opioid problem has raised the prices on medical records. It's a good way to get prescriptions. If you can get somebody's medical records, you can get prescriptions pretty easy. And then what they call a full packet. So a full packet is going to be a date of birth, a social, driver's license with address, and some account numbers. That's typically $30 on the black market. That's kind of the full packet. That's what I guess it's called. So just thought that was interesting. Small businesses make up somewhere around 43% of all data breaches. The public sector is about 16%, healthcare 15%, and financial industry is about 10%. So as you can see, small businesses are a target. They just don't have the resources and stuff to keep everybody out.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, when they say cyber crime pays, it literally, as cheesy as that sounds, it literally does. It's a lucrative a crime. So unfortunately, we will see that to continue to rise. Marty, I wanted to hop over to you. You know, we've talked a lot about protection, but we know that threats will slip through the cracks no matter what we do, no matter how many layers we have, the holes will still exist. So when threats do emerge in your environment, I know that timing is critical. And I saw that industry best practice suggests that you should actually respond within 5 minutes, or you should be notified within 5 minutes of a breach. Why is that quick timing so important?
Oh, you think about it, and unfortunately for the industry, the average right now to detect something like this is 206 days. So when you think about the damage that can be done over 206 days, you know, we've seen a lot of industry leading companies that have been breached, and we later find out that they've been in there for 3-4 years, going through and doing all their escalations of privileges and doing all these things, and you know, to Chad's point, bringing all that information and giving it and selling it to somebody else. I mean, that's what's constantly going on. So having that ability to go through and make sure that you are detecting it is so critical, and making sure that you alarm, you know, contact the right person at the right time, or, you know, working with TJ and his team and making sure that we take that device and contain it as quickly as we possibly can so that it can't spread anything. Because obviously, 5 minutes is, thankfully, they might get into one device, but as soon as we can shut it off and make sure that they can't go laterally to any other devices, obviously it's going to be better for all of us. To Chad's point, you look at the small businesses, if they have a breach, 80% of the businesses never make it back. And that's one of the things that you look at is, making sure that we capture it as quickly as we possibly can. We want to save the information. We want to make sure that they're improving their security posture all the time.
Yeah, and we're more likely or more susceptible to these incidents when they aren't, when you're, we've already said it, when you're not behind the offices or your network security, you're more likely to be prone to these attacks. So monitoring is becoming this focus across small businesses. Enterprises have been doing it for years because they have the resources, money, and people to do it. And so what, can you give us like a nice picture of what monitoring tools are available to small businesses without these internal IT teams? We're familiar with the hardware monitoring aspect of it. We want to be proactive and make sure we don't have any downtime from software problems or hardware problems, but maybe not as comfortable with it on the cybersecurity front. Tell us more.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question because, like you said, when you look at a small office and anywhere less than 50 to 100 people, that IT person probably doesn't have a lot of security expertise, maybe some, but when you start to think about it, and then when you look at, you can't have that person working 7/24 either. So you're looking at, I'm only going to be able to utilize the tools that I have during my shift. And oh, by the way, I have all these other things that I need to be doing. So, I mean, working with, all the teams and the WorkSmart team to make sure that we're enabling them to have access to all of the tools. You look at, we have been building a tool, a platform for 8 years. We have over 800 man years built into this tool that goes through and looks at all of the different threats coming in, making sure that we're understanding exactly what's happening. We can change, we actually roll our code about 11 times a day with all the new advanced threats that we're seeing or something else that we might be getting indications of compromise on. So, I mean, having those smaller customers have that ability to have the same capabilities that enterprise has, leveraging an Arctic Wolf to be doing that SOC on the back end. The security operations is becoming a bigger piece of it, making sure that you have that team supporting you. One of the things that, we pride ourselves on being an extension for those companies. We put a named resource to each one of those accounts that is a security expert, making sure that, when we would go through and hire people, the number one thing that I would ask them is, what is your passion for security? Do you have the passion for the customer? Do you take it personally if that customer were to get breached? We want to make sure that they have those two mindsets. One is security, two is that personal attachment to the customer, and then the third one is making sure that we're passing this information along to all of our teammates as well.
And it's such a cool evolution with the monitoring of cybersecurity, because you're taking what we already know on the side of hardware monitoring and staying proactive. We're taking that same concept and we're delivering it as a service to small businesses because, I can think about having conversations 5 years ago about security posture and about monitoring. And it was so lofty to think about a small business subscribing to a service like, I say SIM, but I don't know if it's actually pronounced SIM. Did I get it right?
Yep.
But like a SIM product or a monitoring solution would have cost $2,500, $3,000 a month for something that still required a lot of work to digest the logs and what's happening in the environment, because it does require that 24/7 set of eyes. And so I really encourage people to think about it as this concept of not maybe a monitoring tool, but this monitoring solution.
Yes.
For small businesses as a service. I'm going to bounce around for a second. We're talking about monitoring, we're talking about detecting, and I like where we're headed because I want to give Marty a chance to talk a little bit more about what we can do to prevent attackers from exploiting user accounts. But before we do that, I want to back up a little bit and talk about when we're remote, the risks that we have being devices and internet protection. And so Brian and TJ, this is going to kind of go to you guys. So we know that devices that we use to access data and the internet connection we use to access data when we're working from home are some of our biggest security risks. So what should we be thinking about for the future in terms of how we can plan to better handle those types of threats? Brian, that's to you.
Okay, that's to me. All right. So Marissa, like you touched on a little bit earlier, it's important to think about, I know right now in the current environment, we're thinking, hey, it's just working from home. It's working here on my network. I know what's here for the most part, hopefully protected from threats, that type of thing. But working remote long-term is going to be even more than that. It's going to be at Starbucks. It's going to be, at the airport while you're waiting to get on that flight. So what TJ was talking about earlier with the encryption, with the data loss protection, and also taking a look at these tools that do endpoint detection and response. A VPN can be an important piece of that, a virtual private network, which is an encrypted connection back to company resources. All of these different pieces kind of help you have a successful strategy around connecting securely to your company data and protecting it from wherever you are. So yeah, I would agree with TJ in that encryption, number one, is one of the biggest things you can do. If you lose that device, say it's a laptop, you don't want it to be as easy as somebody just unscrewing the bottom, pulling out the hard drive, hooking it up to another machine, and suddenly having access to all your data. So encryption on multiple devices, that's a big part of it. That data loss protection, where you're inspecting the content as it's being moved off the device, you're defining, what can happen with that USB drive or hard drive that you're plugging into the machine. And then kind of your table stakes around, make sure your updates are installed. Do you have antivirus and other machine-specific protection on there? I think are all very important pieces.
And we're going to be, you said that if you continue to have remote access, the VPN is an important part of it.
Yeah.
And there's definitely, experts are predicting that we're going to continue to do some capacity of remote work. If obviously not maybe for everybody, but there is this component of rethinking your hardware strategy. Shameless plug, we do have an event coming up in a couple of weeks about rethinking your hardware strategy. Around this concept of people wanting more mobility, but more functionality. I think before we saw a lot of laptop sales about this really thin and portable experience. But I think now that everyone has had an opportunity to really dive into what makes them successful working remotely, we're going to find more powerful machines, having more full functionality, more hosted voice collaboration tools that we can have that full office experience from home. And so in the vein of having those VPNs, TJ, this one's for you. They're big, we rolled them out fast.
Yep.
We can attest to that. Brian can on our team. We saw a lot of tickets from clients to get set up on a VPN pretty quickly. And so whether you have one now or you need to roll one out in the future, what are your thoughts about best practices for VPN security? How can we make sure we do this right?
Yeah, the first thing I would say for securing VPN connectivity is multi-factor authentication. That's going to be the simplest one to implement in most cases, and it's going to be pretty effective. And what multi-factor authentication is going to do is ensure that if for some reason the configuration for the VPN were to fall into the wrong hands, the person who got their hands on that configuration file isn't able to simply just connect. Because they'll obviously need to have 3 pieces of information now. If I get your configuration file and you're simply just using certificate authentication, then there is no credentials that oftentimes get prompted. It simply just automatically connects. Having a password or a passphrase attached to that ups the ante a little bit as far as the difficulty for somebody to get in, but then it is the multi-factor authentication that comes in play. Marty was talking about it earlier with utilizing the same password on multiple fronts, right? People will create a really great complex password that's got 35 characters in it, and it's some mnemonic that they can remember easily, but then they'll use it everywhere. And because it's such a good one. And then some, e-store that they found the cheapest available widget that they were buying, got compromised because it was something thrown up overnight. The security wasn't very well implemented in the first place, and it got compromised. But because you use the same credentials everywhere, now somebody can actually connect to your corporate network or get a hold of the VPN configuration and authenticate with that. By adding the multi-factor authentication, it makes that significantly more difficult to get in. Now, the reason why I say that's going to be the most simplest thing to do is because people are already kind of familiar with dealing with multi-factor authentication. It's not difficult for somebody to recognize, oh, I open an app, it shows me a bunch of numbers, I type it in, and then they go. Because the next step after that would be to do access control lists. And with a VPN, that becomes a bit more difficult because generally speaking, you want your users to be able to connect from wherever they are. And while your users may be relegated to a specific geographic region, they may be coming in through multiple different number of ISPs. And the idea behind access control is to be able to say only people coming from this network or this range of IPs are able to connect to the VPN. It adds a great level of security, but if you simply just think about how broad a range of IP addresses Spectrum has, Verizon has, AT&T has, it almost becomes untenable to be able to maintain that. However, there are also a very large number of IP addresses that are outside the bounds of North America. And so if you wanted to, you could implement something from an access control list to limit who has access by saying, well, nobody overseas, nobody from the UK, Europe, Asia, Africa are allowed to connect from any of those types of IP addresses. So those are the 2 things that I would generally guide somebody towards, with MFA being 99% of it, because the rest of it is simply just that much more difficult to kind of maintain and work with day to day. Now, having said that, again, touching back on what Marty was saying earlier, and that I commented again already, is having complex passwords. The best way to do that, if you really want to be secure, is to use something like a password manager, something like LastPass, something like any of the other open source ones. I'm a LastPass guy, so that's the one that comes off the top of my head already. But it's not that I'm partial to it. Well, I am. I like it. I use it. So I guess I am partial to it. But there are other ones out there. And it's free. And it allows you to actually create that incredibly complex, difficult password, that 35-character mnemonic that you and you alone will remember, and have it only in one place, the master password for your password manager. And then let the password manager make some ridiculous, complex, random generated password for every single site that you use. So worst case scenario, you need to know 2 complex ones, one for your master password and then one for your work account, because you can't really use LastPass for your work account, at least streamlined. You could obviously put LastPass on your phone and then look it up there and type that in every time that you log in, but nobody really wants to do that. So create 2, one for your work account that you'll remember and one for your LastPass for everything else, even other work-related stuff. Once you authenticate to the workstation, then you can go ahead and use LastPass for everything else or other password manager.
And MFA. So you said said multi-factor authentication.
Yes.
So I'm gonna pick on that for a second because it's one of those recurring themes. It's an easy way to, if the account were to be compromised, that there is a second form of authentication required. So you put in your username, you log in successfully with your password, and then you have to use that second, I like to call it my second ID. Make sure I'm, the right age.
Make sure you're you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, we don't want, impersonating Marissa's.
It's too hard.
Yeah.
That's too complicated.
It's not possible to.
I don't think it is. So it's
taken a lot of years to perfect the uniqueness that goes into myself. So that goes without saying. But when it comes to that multi-factor authentication, you talked about using it for the VPN. Another place we use it a lot is Office 365 because it has become such a hub and it has so much information in it. Brian, do you have any other recommendations on how to get the most out of MFA? I know the biggest complaint people have with multi-factor authentication is that it's annoying.
Sure. Yeah. So I think TJ covered a lot of it pretty well. The one thing that we do see pretty commonly utilized specifically on the 365 front, it's called conditional access. So if you do have those trusted locations, if you say, I have the proper things inside my corporate network, I trust a device coming in there. We have the tools and processes in place to protect that. You can reduce the frequency of that prompting for MFA, that type of thing. So that's what we see most commonly. But yeah, MFA is one of the critical things to have in place. Anything internet facing, so VPN, like TJ was talking about, Office 365. There are a ton of different applications, your cloud-based line of business app. And the majority of these systems will support some type of MFA, whether it's an authenticator app on your phone or whether it's sending a text message to your phone, which is slightly less secure, but still better than not having it. So yeah, I think the most important piece is just to make sure you have any system that you can put MFA on. You definitely want to have that in place.
Right.
And I would simply just kind of piggyback on that. Just one other thing is, it is, a little bit more of a pain in the neck to have to look at it, but simply just look at it as a matter of the ramifications if something is compromised is much more painful.
Yeah.
And this is simply just beyond work stuff. This is your own personal information, right? Anytime you log into your bank account online to do your payments, you should be using two-factor authentication there for sure. Anything around your 401k and your investment accounts, if it's absolutely possible, use it there. I mean, there have been cases where people's retirement accounts have been completely drained because the authentication wasn't in place and somebody was able to gain access. It is really cheap insurance because the authenticator apps are free. It's the back-end systems that actually have to do the enforcement. So take the extra 10, 15 seconds to deal with that. We like simplicity because we want to get things done now, but it is by far way more important that you take those 15 seconds to do it than deal with having to recover, a massive financial hit in a personal life or the complete destruction of your life's work and your business going down the tubes because somebody's credentials were compromised, which then compromised the entire network. And as Marty said, 80 to 90% of organizations that are hit by a security threat in the small business realm do not survive beyond 6 months. And that number actually creeps closer to 100% when you get beyond 2 years after a particular security event. So take the 15 extra seconds, 30 seconds. It is absolutely worth it.
So on the other side of that, Marty, I'm going to go back to you to kind of talk more about the monitoring aspect of it. We're talking about putting in multi-factor authentication to help validate who you are. But what about the idea of the inactive user accounts that might be lying around? Attackers are known to exploit those. So what can we do to make sure that we are staying in front of those?
Yeah, the first thing that you want to do is make sure that as soon as an employee or anybody, a contractor, anybody leaves the company or becomes hostile or anything, remove them immediately. Obviously, that's the perfect world. The second thing, doing the scans, we're constantly doing a scan just to make sure that if we see that user out in the dark web or the gray web, we notify the company of that immediately, just to let them know that the credentials have been sitting out there. There are risks. So we want to make sure that they go in and if they are still there, change their password, change a lot of this stuff up. But the biggest thing is just making sure that as soon as that person is gone, get them out of the system. Obviously we can detect if they have a valid username and password. We see it. Obviously that's not going to be a great thing because they're still actually active. The thing that's really key is making sure that you're working with the security team. The security team is going to know that if we need to put a special rule in saying if this person tries to log in, we just haven't been able to do that, we can lock them out that way as well.
And I know that another kind of maintenance piece, just in general, IT management, reviewing accounts regularly, whether it's, Brian, do you have thoughts on whether that's like once a quarter or once a year, how often you audit your kind of system accounts and admin accounts?
Yeah, ideally, well, let me take a step back. I would say it depends on the size of your business. If you're a 2-person, 3-person company, 5-person company that everybody's been there for 30 years and you never really have any turnover, then maybe annually is appropriate. The majority of our clients, I would like to see either monthly or quarterly, depending on the company profile. And there is reporting and monitoring that can be done around that as well. So, maybe it's, if you're not catching it for some reason when the employee leaves, maybe it's at that 30-day mark where you have an account that hasn't logged in for that amount of days or whatever those parameters are around it, being able to do that as well.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, Brian, is one of the things that we can do is, put a number of attempts that they can try to log in. If it's 3 or 5 or whatever, obviously we can trigger off that as well. So, I mean, it's something that obviously to assist to make sure that we're going to capture it as quickly as we possibly can.
Yeah, and I'm hearing there's tools and there's process.
Yeah.
And so just kind of making sure that there's an equal balance of that, especially when it comes to small businesses. Really, I've heard this phrase before, but you can solution things to death. So making sure that back in that identity phase, that you're seeing what kind of risks and whether you can tolerate those risks, and then you can identify if starting with a policy makes sense, or if it needs to be reinforced by a tool. So Brian, you said this earlier, and someone else may have said it as well, but the cybersecurity business continuity plan. We talk about backup and disaster recovery. In the 11 years I've worked with WorkSmart, a lot. But this idea of a cybersecurity business continuity plan is an extension of that. And you touched on it a little bit. Can you give us a little bit more of a insight into what that is and why it's important?
Yeah, definitely. So, so just like you have, kind of those normal business continuity threats, whether it's a tornado or a hurricane or the building burns down or whatever kind of traditional situation you would need a business continuity plan in, you have an even larger risk of a cybersecurity incident happening than something like that. So it has more or less the same goal. Once you experience one of these events, it defines that plan to get you back online and resume operations. So what we like to see in cybersecurity incident plans is a couple of different things. It needs to define, and you need to communicate with your employees what their role is in reporting incidents. So that's the first piece. Make sure your team is informed, make sure your team is educated around that. The second one, from a leadership team perspective, You need to know your responsibilities in your plan and notifying, your insurance carrier, external parties. If there are any regulatory requirements that are specific to your business, you need to know what that communication plan is around that. If there's going to be a PR piece to it, that type of thing. And then in the instance you do have an incident, you definitely want, after you've recovered from it, you definitely want to review that policy and update it. Any lessons learned, any things that could have been done better. Would recommend that that's a living document that you improve over time and as your business grows and scales.
Anyone else from the panel have any thoughts on the cybersecurity business continuity plan?
Marissa, I could kind of speak on that a little bit as well too. One of the things that what I would call the better insurance companies, the ones that specialize in this coverage rather than just generally adding it to a policy and giving small limits, they actually are offering training services, onboarding training services, incident response templates, those kind of things. They're doing a better job of value-added services that come with the policy for free. So obviously that helps in the claim. So, there's a back-end reason for all of this, as there usually is, but financially it keeps the claim down. If you do have the insurance, typically, and Marty's probably seen this, I'm thinking maybe Marty, the insured, if there's coverage in place and it's a covered loss, they get to go back to what they do or sell or market or whatnot. And there's a team of adjusters or the team that handles the response, and they work with Marty's and Brian's and everybody else to recover it, and then you're able to turn in any lost income. So insurance is definitely part of that component, I would say, for sure.
What advice do you have, Chad, to somebody who hears this and says, okay, I want to find cybersecurity insurance? What's the best thing for them to look out to getting the right policy?
Well, so first of all, some coverage is better than not any coverage at all. So I don't want to downplay somebody's policy or coverage. Typically speaking, the policies that somebody has added an endorsement to their regular policy is probably going to be very generic, and probably the adjusters or the response team would not be specialized. You find that a lot. You do want to pay attention to the details. If you take out an application for cyber coverage, here's the thing that's very unique to these policies. It is what's called a warranty application. So what that means is if you tell somebody these are the procedures, if you tell the underwriter, these are the 5 procedures that we do, these are, this is what the company has in place. If you then have a claim and you did not have those in place, there's denial of coverage. So every year you go back through and you do a new application. So be very wary of your agent filling out the application for you and then you signing the bottom. That happens, unfortunately, and that could put somebody in a very tough spot. One other thing I wanted to bring up too is in fraudulent transfer, which would be, the email from Ricky Ayers to Marissa that says, please, transfer this $10,000. Some carriers do have what's called a callback verification exclusion in the policies, which means if you spoke on it earlier, and I kind of wanted to bring it up, if Marissa is supposed to call Ricky to make sure that that is a good transfer and she doesn't, some carriers will deny that claim as well. So the devil is in the details of your policy. A lot of agents that don't understand the coverage actually stay away from it because they just don't understand it enough to sell it, and they're worried that the insured might ask a question. So just be aware of that. Read the application before you sign it, And if you are the applicant and you are filling out the application, you want to be very precise in your answers, but not long-winded, because again, that is part of the policy. So answer it truthfully, but very precisely, and move on. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That's the best way I've ever heard anyone put it. Truthfully, but short and sweet.
That's right.
So don't ask me to help you fill out your applications.
That's right.
And Chad is not one of those agents that's like afraid to answer questions.
No.
He's great. He's here to answer all your questions, which now is a good time actually to remind you, we're about at the end of time. So if you have any last questions that you want to pitch to the experts, please type them into the Q&A because we'd love to address them.
Yes.
One thing that I'd like to just add is, obviously, as we went through and just talked about having your disaster recovery plan and things like this, it's, when you think about it, just during this hour and a half that we were on the phone, there was probably about 80,000 attempts to get into businesses just in the United States. So you think about it, it's not if, it's when you're going to be hit. So having that plan in place, having all these different capabilities. Marissa, you talked about it, you can have all the greatest tools in the world, but if you don't have, it comes back to the human aspect of it as well, to make sure that you're looking and monitoring it. They do say by 2021, we're going to be 3.5 million people short of the cyber security positions available. So it's just incredible. So just wanted to reiterate that.
That's incredible. I mean, there's definitely an industry for artificial intelligence helping with that monitoring. That's a whole nother webinar. Dawn, do we have any other, are we seeing any questions? I have one
questions in my feed. You have one. Okay.
One question for Chad. When we were talking about the cyber insurance and we're talking about the application, is that application like a form that where you essentially asks you a question about your environment and your practices?
Typically, the application is going to ask for if you own any other subsidiaries or if anybody else needs to be a named insured, you'd want to be upfront and tell them that. You want to give a full scope of your services. You don't really want to leave out certain areas. You want to be upfront about what you do. Revenues, that's going to be part of it. And then, yes, definitely just, and it's very generic. So, firewalls in place, encryption, how many employees, do you have? Are those employees using laptops? If so, what are the procedures used? And is what I have seen is people maybe answer it the way they think it should be answered rather than the way they're doing it. And then they plan on adding that because they've answered yes, and then they never get around to it. Small business owners are notorious for that. We're all busy. We have many hats. So it's not detailed. It's not a trap by any means. It's just kind of basic information.
Perfect. I like to give people a little bit of insight to know what it looks like when they go to have the conversation about it, and that when they see that questionnaire about their environment, that they don't have that visceral reaction where it's, oh no, I don't have all these things in place, I better go run away, they're never going to insure me. So that's good to talk about. I don't see any questions over here. Dawn, do you see something different?
No, we are questioned out. But I do have one last thing to share before we go. And that is, oh, somebody said they learned a lot. So thank you for that. Great, that's what we're here for. Okay, so I have one last thing to share before we go. So I'm going to share my screen. Just a second. And that is upcoming events. So this is part, and you can see this, right, Marissa?
Yep.
I can.
Okay, cool. So we have a few events coming up in the remote office series. I think I mentioned at the beginning that this is one of many. And there's a couple more. So next week you can join Marissa and I again, and we are going to go through some basic training for Office 365 apps. So we're going to be talking all about collaboration and productivity through these tools that Office 365 has that are free with your license. We're actually gonna like take you through a test drive of like a day in the life of a project. So you'll see Marissa and I collaborating in real time on some different things like Planner and OneDrive and OneNote, just so you can see like how to do these things. So this is a really great opportunity to bring all of your end users to. And then the following week, we're going to take that same project and we're going to show you how that all comes together in Microsoft Teams. So it's a very end user focused training. It's a very how-to type training. It's a very, like Marissa and I are not, I'm not a technical person. I am an events person. So you're going to see what this looks like in the day in the life of an end user. So again, that's a really good one to bring, to share with your end users. And then the following week, Marissa did mention we are doing a home office hardware refresh type thing where we're going to be chatting with our friends from Lenovo, taking a look at some of their best products that can go anywhere, whether your team members are working from home or they're at that airport or they're at the office. So we'll be really highlighting things like laptops and portable second monitors. And then this is a sad announcement, but it's a good announcement. But the last event that you can see on your screen is actually going to be the last one in this remote office series. We're going to wrap this thing up, and then we're going to start talking about some other stuff in the future. So this last event, we haven't solidified the time yet for, but that's why there's that star there. But we're calling it Back to the Future. So you're actually going to be hearing from Clay Harris, who is our COO. He's going to be kind of talking about like some recap of all the things that are really good to remember if you're staying remote, and then really going to be focusing on the future and getting back to like some not remote office specific technologies, because those are important too. So join us for all of those. And if you can't make it live but you still want the content, you can actually still register on those same links, and we'll make sure that you get the recording. And if you need those links, you can send me an email, but otherwise they'll be in the email with the recording tomorrow.
Yes, very excited. But thank you so much to our folks, our experts that joined and let me pick your brains. I much appreciate it. I know I threw a little bit curveball out. I kind of jumped around a little bit, so I appreciate you taking the time to be with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to have been here.
Great.
And thank you, Marissa, for moderating. You did an excellent job as always.
Well,
and
thank you, Dawn. Thank you as well.
All right. Thanks.